The black woman entered the courthouse like any other morning. Officers Rick Donnelly and Brent Kearns thought they knew exactly what they saw. A lone figure to humiliate, another powerless body to control. With sneers and false authority, they dragged her into a back room, cuffed her, and shaved her hair, laughing as clumps fell to the floor. To them, it was routine, cruel but safe, because the system always shielded their misconduct. But arrogance is blinding. What they didn't know was that the woman they'd just brutalized was the presiding judge on their separate misconduct case. Their reckoning was inevitable. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning sun cast long shadows across Judge Claudia Hayes' bedroom as she stood before her mirror, adjusting her silk blouse with practiced precision. Today wasn't just another day in court. It was the culmination of months of preparation for a critical police misconduct hearing. Her fingers traced the smooth fabric, each movement deliberate and measured. She chose a charcoal gray pantsuit that commanded respect without her judicial robe. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders as she gathered her briefcase, checking twice to ensure all essential documents were in place. Her badge, tucked securely in its leather case, represented not just authority, but a 2-decade journey through a system that hadn't always welcomed her presence. The crisp autumn air greeted her as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Claudia had always preferred walking to the courthouse, using the time to organize her thoughts. The street was quiet, with only the occasional car passing by, and early morning joggers nodding in greeting. Her heels clicked against the concrete in a steady rhythm, matching the determined beating of her heart. As she approached the courthouse steps, the familiar limestone building loomed above her. Its classical columns reached toward the sky, a symbol of justice that sometimes felt more like an illusion than reality. Regular morning visitors, lawyers, clerks, and defendants formed their usual lines at the security checkpoint. Deputy Wallace stood at his post behind the metal detector, his face set in its habitual expression of disdain. His eyes narrowed as Claudia approached, and she could see his jaw tighten. She'd dealt with his subtle antagonism for years, the way he seemed to take particular pleasure in making certain people wait longer, check more thoroughly, submit to additional screening. "Morning," Claudia said evenly, placing her briefcase on the conveyor belt. The metal detector beeped as she walked through. It always did, thanks to the underwire in her bra. Wallace's lips curled into a sneer. "Going to need you to step aside for additional screening." His voice carried that familiar note of satisfaction. Before Claudia could respond, 2 patrol officers materialized beside her. Officer Rick Donnelly's bulk cast a shadow over her, while Officer Brent Kearns circled to her other side, his movements smooth and calculated. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," Kearns said, his tone professionally cold. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." Claudia maintained her composure, though her pulse quickened. There must be some mistake. "I'm Judge Hayes." She reached for her badge case. "Sure you are," Donnelly cut in, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He snatched the badge case from her hand before she could open it. "And I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court." "That badge is clearly fake," Kearns added, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. "Pretty good forgery, though. Where'd you get it? Same place you got those protest signs?" A small crowd had begun to gather, maintaining a safe distance. Claudia could see the uncertainty in their faces. Courthouse regulars who recognized her but were too afraid to speak up. A young clerk took half a step forward, then retreated when Donnelly shot him a warning glare. "This is completely unnecessary," Claudia stated firmly. "I have ID in my briefcase. If you'll allow me—" "Hands behind your back," Donnelly barked, producing handcuffs with a flourish. "Now." Claudia's heart pounded against her ribs. but she kept her voice steady. "I will not. I am a federal judge, and you are making a serious mistake." Kearns moved behind her while Donnelly grabbed her wrist. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her skin as they roughly secured her arms behind her back. The humiliation burned hot across her face, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Look at her, acting all high and mighty," Donnelly sneered, loud enough for the growing audience to hear. "Bet you thought that fancy suit would fool everyone, huh?" Wallace watched from his post, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He made no move to intervene, seemingly enjoying the spectacle. Claudia's briefcase sat abandoned on the conveyor belt as the officers began marching her toward a back corridor. Her heels, which had carried her so confidently into the courthouse countless times before, now scraped awkwardly against the floor as they pushed her forward. The morning light streaming through the courthouse windows caught the faces of staff members who pressed themselves against walls and ducked behind corners. Their eyes held recognition, fear, and shame, but none moved to help. The echo of her footsteps mixed with the heavy boots of the officers, creating a discordant rhythm that bounced off the marble walls. "Time to teach someone about respecting authority," Kearns said quietly. His words meant only for her ears as they approached a door marked "Security Personnel Only." Claudia held her head high, even as they pushed her through the door. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating a small room that would become the stage for their power play. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing her in with her tormentors, while the whispers of the courthouse carried on outside. The security room was cramped and cold, with bare concrete walls and harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look sickly and pale. A metal chair sat in the center, bolted to the floor, a detail that made Claudia's stomach tighten. The air smelled of stale coffee and cleaning supplies. "Have a seat, Your Honor," Rick sneered, shoving Claudia toward the chair. She managed to maintain her balance despite the handcuffs, refusing to stumble. Her eyes swept the room, taking in every detail, memorizing every face. Wallace leaned against the door, arms crossed, watching with that same satisfied smirk. Brent circled behind the chair like a shark, his footsteps deliberate and measured. The room felt smaller with each passing second. "You know," Rick said, leaning in close enough that Claudia could smell his breath. "I've been wanting to meet you for a long time. Heard you were some hotshot judge who thinks she knows everything about police work." Claudia met his gaze steadily. "I know enough about the law to recognize multiple violations happening right now." Brent's hands clamped down on her shoulders, forcing her into the chair. "Still talking like a judge? Maybe we need to remind you who's really in charge here." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Rick walked to a small cabinet in the corner. The metallic scrape of a drawer opening cut through the silence. When he turned back, he held a pair of electric clippers in his hand, flexing the power cord like a whip. "You know what they do in prison?" Rick asked, plugging in the clippers. The device hummed to life with an ominous buzz. "They take away everything that makes you feel special. Your clothes, your jewelry." He grinned. "Your hair." Claudia's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "This won't end well for any of you." "Oh, I think it will," Brent said from behind her, his fingers digging into her shoulders. "Nobody's going to believe you over 3 respected officers." "Right, Wallace." Wallace shifted his weight, looking slightly uncomfortable but making no move to intervene. "Just don't leave any marks." Rick brought the clippers close to Claudia's face, letting her feel the vibration against her cheek. "Want to beg? Might make me go easier on you." Claudia stared straight ahead, her silence more powerful than any words. This seemed to anger Rick, whose face flushed red. The first pass of the clippers cut a harsh line through her carefully styled hair. Dark locks fell to the floor in clumps, scattered around the chair like dead leaves. Rick worked sloppily, intentionally leaving patches and uneven spots, taking particular pleasure in creating a jagged pattern. Smile. Brent pulled out his phone, snapping photos as Rick continued his work. This is definitely going in my personal collection. Delete those, Wallace warned from the door. Can't have evidence. Relax, Brent replied, still taking pictures. These are just for us. A little souvenir of our quality time with the honorable judge. Claudia focused on her breathing, slow and measured, as more hair fell. She thought about every case she'd presided over, every victim who'd sought justice in her courtroom. Their faces gave her strength. Each humiliating stroke of the clippers only hardened her resolve. Rick stepped back to admire his handiwork, laughing at the patchy remnants of Claudia's hair. Not exactly courthouse appropriate anymore, is it? Might need to invest in a wig. Brent circled around to face her, phone still recording. Any final words of wisdom from the bench? Claudia remained silent, her eyes boring into his with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. Her scalp stung where the clippers had scraped too close, but she refused to show any sign of discomfort. Getting boring now, Rick grumbled, disappointed by her continued composure. He roughly brushed hair from her shoulders, each touch meant to demean. Maybe we should give her a matching prison tattoo. That's enough, Wallace said, finally pushing away from the door. You've made your point. Get her out of here before someone comes looking. Rick unclipped the handcuffs with unnecessary force. He grabbed Claudia's badge from the counter and tossed it at her feet, where it clattered against the concrete floor amid the scattered hair. Go tell your boss what happens when you cross us, Brent said, opening the door. I'm sure they'd love to hear all about your little makeover. Claudia stood slowly, her legs steady despite everything. She bent down with deliberate grace to retrieve her badge, tucking it into her pocket. Chunks of her hair clung to her jacket and blouse. She made no move to brush them away. They followed her to the door, their presence heavy behind her. The hallway seemed brighter now, the fluorescent lights harsh against her exposed scalp. Her briefcase waited where she'd left it, untouched on the security conveyor belt. Claudia picked up her briefcase, her movements precise and controlled. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to break, to run, to show some sign of defeat. Instead, she straightened her spine and began walking toward the courtroom, each step measured and purposeful, leaving her tormentors behind. The federal courtroom buzzed with anticipation, packed wall to wall with reporters clutching notepads and community activists wearing protest buttons. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. At the defense table, officers Rick Donnelly and Brent Kearns sat with easy smirks, their uniforms pressed and badges gleaming. The court clerk stood, shuffling papers nervously. All rise. The United States District Court for the Eastern District is now in session. The Honorable Judge Claudia Hayes presiding. The heavy doors at the back of the chambers swung open. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery as Claudia entered. Her bald head bore angry red marks where the clippers had scraped too close. Under the harsh courtroom lights, every patch and uneven spot from Rick's brutal handiwork was clearly visible. Claudia walked with measured steps toward the bench, her back straight, her expression carved from stone. Her black judicial robe was draped over her arm, the thick fabric a shield she had worn countless times before. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the rows like wildfire. Oh my God! What happened to her hair? Is that really Judge Hayes? Someone attacked her. At the defense table, Rick and Brent's smug expressions froze, then crumbled as recognition dawned. Their faces drained of color so quickly they might have been dunked in ice water. Their attorney leaned in, whispering frantically, his hands making sharp, agitated gestures. Claudia ascended the steps to her chair, every movement deliberate and controlled. She slipped on her judicial robe with practiced ease, the familiar weight settling across her shoulders. When she sat, her presence seemed to fill the entire chamber. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady. The microphone carried her words to every corner of the suddenly silent room. "This is case number 2023 CR 405, United States, versus officers Richard Donnelly and Brent Kearns, on charges of civil rights violations under color of law." Rick's leg bounced rapidly under the table. Brent stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight, a muscle twitched in his cheek. Their attorney scribbled frantically on his legal pad, occasionally shooting panicked glances at his clients. "Are both parties ready to proceed?" Claudia asked, as if this were any other day in her courtroom. The prosecution stood first, a tall woman with steel-gray hair. "Ready for the United States, Your Honor." The defense attorney jerked to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Your Honor, the defense requests an immediate sidebar." "Denied," Claudia said, her tone brooking no argument. "Are you prepared to proceed, counsel?" "But, Your Honor..." "A simple yes or no will suffice." The attorney tugged at his collar. Yes, Your Honor, but we have serious concerns about..." "Your concerns are noted. You may be seated." Claudia turned to the jury box, where 12 citizens sat ramrod straight, their eyes darting between her and the defendants. "Members of the jury, you will hear testimony today regarding a pattern of misconduct by officers Donnelly and Kearns spanning several years." The prosecutor rose again, opening a thick binder. "The United States calls Maria Rodriguez as our first witness." A small woman in her 60s approached the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. She described how Rick and Brent had beaten her teenage son during a traffic stop, then falsified their report to claim he had resisted arrest. Throughout the testimony, Claudia maintained perfect composure. She ruled on objections with precision, her voice never wavering. Only someone watching very closely might notice how her fingers occasionally brushed her scalp, or how her eyes hardened whenever they fell on the defendants. The morning proceeded with a parade of witnesses. A young black man described being choked until he passed out. A store owner testified about surveillance footage that mysteriously disappeared after capturing the officers planting evidence. Each story built upon the last, painting a damning picture of systematic abuse. Rick and Brent seemed to shrink in their chairs with each passing hour. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by mounting dread. They whispered constantly to their attorney, who appeared close to hyperventilating. As the lunch hour approached, Claudia glanced at the clock mounted on the wall. "We'll recess for 1 hour," she announced, bringing down her gavel with a sharp crack that made both officers flinch. "Court will reconvene at 1:30 p.m. The gallery erupted in excited chatter the moment she stood. Reporters rushed for the doors, phones already pressed to their ears. Community activists huddled in clusters, their voices thick with amazement and outrage. The irony of her attackers sitting in her courtroom, now at her mercy, sparked intense discussions throughout the chamber. "All rise," the clerk called out, as Claudia descended from the bench, her robe flowing behind her like a dark wave. She strode toward her chambers, leaving Rick and Brent to stare after her, with the haunted expressions of men who had just realized they had dug their own graves. Claudia sat behind her desk in chambers, the afternoon sun casting long shadows through the Venetian blinds. A gentle knock preceded Marcus Lee's entrance, followed by 2 U.S. Marshals. Her clerk's usually warm face was tight with concern. "Deputy Wallace is here as requested, Your Honor," Marcus announced, his voice professional but his eyes conveying silent support. Wallace strode in with his typical swagger, hand resting casually on his holster. His security uniform was crisp, badge gleaming under the office lights. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth, the same expression he'd worn while watching Rick and Brent attack her that morning. You wanted to see me, Judge Hayes? His tone dripped with barely concealed contempt. Claudia didn't invite him to sit. Instead, she opened a thick manila folder on her desk. Deputy Wallace, I've spent my lunch hour reviewing your personnel file. The complete version, not the sanitized one you've managed to maintain for public view. Wallace's smirk faltered slightly. My file is clean. 27 years of service. 27 years of documented harassment, racial profiling, and abuse of power, Claudia corrected, her voice sharp as a blade. All conveniently buried through your connections with the previous administration. She began reading from the first page. March 2015. Complaint filed by Maria Gonzalez, courthouse interpreter. Quote, Deputy Wallace subjected me to 3 additional metal detector passes while making degrading comments about my accent and suggesting I might be hiding drugs. Wallace shifted his weight, the leather of his gun belt creaking. That was a routine security check. July 2017. Claudia continued as if he hadn't spoken. Complaint from James Washington, attorney. Quote, Deputy Wallace singled out my African-American clients for additional screening while allowing white defendants to pass through with minimal inspection. That's protocol. September 2019. Complaint from Sarah Chen, law student. Quote, Deputy Wallace made inappropriate comments about my body during security screening and suggested my clerkship interview was based on, quote, filling diversity quotas. Wallace's face had grown red. These are all lies and misunderstandings. There are 47 similar complaints in this file. Claudia's voice remained steady, but her eyes blazed. All of them disappeared into administrative black holes. All of them dismissed without investigation. Until now. Marcus stepped forward with a digital recorder, placing it on her desk. He pressed a button, and Wallace's voice filled the room. Hold her down tight. Let's show this one what happens when they don't know their place. Wallace's hand twitched toward his holster, but the U.S. Marshals moved closer, their presence a clear warning. Claudia continued playing the recording, his laughter, his encouragement as Rick and Brent attacked her, his instructions to delete evidence. Your badge, Deputy Wallace. Claudia's command cut through the tension like a knife. You can't. Your badge. Now. Each word landed like a hammer blow. You are suspended effective immediately, pending federal charges for civil rights violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Wallace's face twisted with rage. You uppity disgrace. Choose your next words very carefully, one of the marshals warned, his hand now resting openly on his weapon. With trembling fingers, Wallace unpinned his badge. He threw it onto Claudia's desk, where it skittered across police reports and witness statements, years of his victims' voices finally being heard. Cuff him, Claudia ordered. The marshals moved in smoothly, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing in the chamber. As they led Wallace toward the door, Marcus stepped closer to Claudia's desk. Judge, he said softly, they won't take this lying down. The police union, the old guard, they'll fight back hard. Let them. Claudia stood, touching her bare scalp. The angry marks still stung, but they fueled her resolve. Every complaint, every cover-up, every abuse will be entered into the official record. No more burying the truth. Outside her chambers, they could hear gasps and whispers as Wallace was marched through the courthouse corridors. Staff members who had feared him for years pressed against walls, watching with a mixture of shock and vindication as their tormentor was led away in chains. Claudia gathered her robe, preparing to return to the courtroom where Rick and Brent awaited. Her hands didn't shake as she straightened the judicial collar. Years of buried injustice were finally surfacing, and she would ensure every single one saw the light of day. Marcus held the door for her, his loyalty evident in every movement. The afternoon session is about to begin, Your Honor. Claudia nodded, squaring her shoulders. The weight of her responsibility settled around her like armor. She had sworn an oath to uphold justice, and today, despite the personal cost, despite the coming storm, she would honor that oath. Claudia sat alone at her kitchen table, picking at a plate of pasta that had long since gone cold. The TV murmured in the background, its blue light casting strange shadows across her dining room. She hadn't bothered to turn on the lights. The darkness felt oddly comforting after such a brutal day. Breaking news in the federal courthouse scandal. The anchor's voice cut through her thoughts. Controversy erupts as longtime courthouse security deputy Wallace Jenkins is arrested on federal charges. Footage played of Wallace being led out in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage. The scene shifted to Rick and Brent's police union representative standing at a podium, his jowls quivering with manufactured outrage. "This is a clear abuse of judicial power," the union rep declared. "Officers Donnelly and Kearns are decorated veterans being railroaded by a judge who's clearly lost her objectivity. Judge Hayes's actions today prove she's emotionally compromised and unfit to preside over this case." Claudia's fork clattered against her plate. She reached for her wine glass, hand steady despite her anger. The union rep's face was replaced by a panel of talking heads, each offering their hot take on her fitness for the bench. "The judge's behavior shows clear signs of emotional instability," a silver-haired legal expert proclaimed. "Any defendant would be right to question her impartiality after today's display." "But what about the allegations that these officers assaulted her?" a younger commentator countered. "Doesn't that warrant—" "Allegedly assaulted," another pundit interrupted. "We only have her word for what happened this morning. Where's the security footage? Where are the witnesses?" Her phone buzzed. Marcus's text read, "Turn on Channel 7. D.A. Denton's making his move." Claudia switched channels. District Attorney Harold Denton's practiced smile filled the screen, his carefully chosen words dripping with false concern. "While any allegations of misconduct must be taken seriously," Denton said, straightening his tie, "we must also ensure our judicial process remains untainted by personal vendettas. I've spoken with several colleagues who share my concerns about Judge Hayes's objectivity in this matter." The sound of chanting filtered through her windows. Claudia moved to the living room, peering through the curtains. Two groups of protesters faced off across her front lawn. On one side, supporters held signs reading, "Justice for Judge Hayes" and "End Police Brutality." On the other, angry faces shouted, "Back the Blue" and "Remove the Biased Judge." Her phone buzzed again. "Marcus, Denton's meeting with Chief Judge tomorrow. Sources say they're discussing removing you from the case. Need to talk ASAP." A police cruiser rolled slowly past her house, its spotlight sweeping across her windows. Claudia didn't flinch. Let them try to intimidate her. She'd faced worse today and remained standing. The TV droned on. Sources close to the department suggest officers Donnelly and Kearns were responding to credible threats of courthouse disruption. Their attorney claims Judge Hayes became combative during a routine security check. Claudia muted the television, her appetite completely gone now. She carried her wine glass to the bathroom, flicking on the harsh fluorescent light. Her reflection stared back, head bare, scalp marked with angry red patches where the clippers had bit too deep. The union's words echoed, emotionally unstable. Denton's veiled threat, personal vendetta. The pundits' questions, where's the evidence? They thought they could bury this like they'd buried Wallace's complaints. They thought they could paint her as hysterical, unstable, unfit. They thought they could break her with threats and intimidation, just like they'd broken so many victims before. Her hand traced the rough patches on her scalp. Each scrape, each cut told the truth they wanted to hide. Her bare head wasn't a mark of shame, it was evidence of their brutality, their arrogance, their certainty that they would never face consequences. Outside, the chanting grew louder. Her phone buzzed with more warnings, more threats, more calls for her removal. The TV silently played footage of her entering the courtroom, bald and unbowed. Claudia leaned closer to the mirror, meeting her own gaze. Her eyes were clear, her jaw set with determination. She saw no victim in her reflection, only strength, only resolve, only the unwavering commitment to justice that had guided her entire career. "They won't break me," she whispered to her reflection. The words weren't a hope or a prayer. They were a statement of fact, as immutable as the law itself. The protesters could scream. The union could threaten. The DA could scheme. But they had made a fatal mistake this morning. They had shown her exactly who they were, exactly how they operated, exactly what they thought they could get away with. Now she would show them exactly who she was. Her fingers traced the smooth skin of her scalp one more time, and she straightened her spine. In the mirror, a judge stared back, not a victim, not a target, but a federal judge who had sworn an oath to uphold justice. And that's exactly what she intended to do. "They won't break me," she repeated, the words stronger now. Her reflection nodded back, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The morning sun streamed through the high windows of Claudia's chambers, casting long shadows across her polished desk. Her new reality felt strange. The cool air on her bare scalp, the whispers that followed her through the courthouse halls, the mix of pity and respect in people's eyes. Marcus paced before her desk, clutching a thick manila envelope. His usual calm demeanor had given way to nervous energy. "Someone slipped this under my apartment door last night," he said, placing the envelope on her desk. "No name, no note, but Judge," his voice dropped to a whisper, "this is dynamite." Claudia opened the envelope carefully, spreading its contents across her desk. Internal affairs reports, civilian complaints, medical records, email chains, years of documented misconduct, all carefully buried. "Look at the pattern," Marcus said, pointing to highlighted sections. "Donnelly and Kearns worked together for 6 years. Every time they're accused of excessive force, the same names appear. Wallace handling security, internal affairs burying the complaints, union reps blocking investigations." Claudia's fingers traced a photo of a young man's bruised face. The report beneath it had been marked unfounded, despite multiple witness statements. "How many?" she asked. 27 complaints in 6 years, Marcus replied. "All buried. All involving minorities or protesters. And those are just the ones that made it into official records." A knock at her chamber door made them both freeze. Marcus quickly gathered the papers, ready to hide them, but Claudia raised her hand. "Enter!" she called. A man stepped in, early 40s, plainclothes detective's badge on his belt, tired eyes that had seen too much. He closed the door quietly behind him. "Detective Alan Price," he introduced himself, voice low. "I'm sorry to intrude, Your Honor, but—" He glanced at Marcus. "My clerk stays," Claudia said firmly. "What can I do for you, Detective?" Price's shoulders slumped with visible relief. "I've been waiting for someone to finally stand up to them. When I saw what happened to you yesterday—" He shook his head. "I can't stay quiet anymore." Claudia gestured to a chair. Price sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I worked with Donnelly and Kearns for 3 years in narcotics," he began. "Watched them plant evidence, falsify reports, rough up suspects, always targeting specific types of people. When I tried reporting it, Wallace would lose the paperwork. When I pushed harder, my cases started falling apart. Evidence would disappear. Witnesses would recant." Marcus set a legal pad before him. "We'll need specifics, dates, names." Price nodded. "I kept records, detailed notes, Copies of original reports before they were altered, even some audio recordings. I knew someday someone would need them. Detective, Claudia leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. You understand what you're risking? The department, the union, they'll come after you hard. They already are, Price said with a bitter laugh. My partner was reassigned last month. My overtime's been cut. My kid's college fund is running dry, but he met Claudia's eyes. Yesterday, my daughter asked me why the police hurt a judge. She's 12. How do I explain that to her? Claudia touched her bare scalp unconsciously. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Price's voice strengthened. You stood up to them, even after what they did. If you can stand, I can stand. Marcus began taking notes as Price detailed years of misconduct, names, dates, incidents, a pattern of abuse protected by a system designed to hide it. Claudia listened, her anger growing not at the individual acts, but at the machinery that enabled them. There's more, Price said finally. The chief judge, D.A. Denton, they're part of it. Monthly meetings with union reps, deciding which cases to bury, which officers to protect. I have dates, locations. A sharp knock interrupted them. Marcus opened the door to find the court bailiff. Your Honor, Chief Judge Morton requests your presence in his chambers immediately. Claudia stood, straightening her robe. Detective Price, my clerk will get your full statement. We'll need everything documented, everything verified. Price rose, determination replacing the weariness in his eyes. Whatever you need, Your Honor. I'm all in now. Marcus, Claudia gathered the files from her desk. Secure copies of everything, multiple locations, and get me the courthouse surveillance logs for the past 6 months. All of them. She faced Price one last time. Are you absolutely sure? If you stand, I'll stand, he repeated firmly. Claudia nodded, tucking the files into her briefcase. What had started as a case against 2 officers had just become something much larger. The system that protected them, the officials who enabled them, the machinery of injustice itself, all of it would be exposed. She touched her bare scalp again, feeling the rough patches where their clippers had cut too deep. They had meant it as humiliation, never imagining it would become fuel for something much bigger than themselves. Marcus opened her chamber door. Beyond it lay the courthouse, its corridors filled with the powerful men who thought they controlled it. But today, those corridors would begin leading to truth. The afternoon sun blazed through the courtroom's tall windows, casting harsh shadows across Detective Alan Price's face as he took the witness stand. His hands trembled slightly as he was sworn in, but his voice remained steady. Claudia observed him from the bench, noting how the other officers in the gallery glared at him with naked hostility. The air felt thick with tension. Detective Price, the prosecutor began, how long have you worked with Officers Donnelly and Kearns? 3 years in narcotics, Price replied, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. From 2020 to 2023. And during that time, what patterns of behavior did you observe? Price's eyes flickered briefly to Rick and Brent at the defense table. They had a system. They'd target specific types of people, minorities, protesters, anyone they thought wouldn't have the means to fight back. They'd plant evidence, falsify reports, use excessive force. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Rick's face darkened, his jaw clenching visibly. Could you provide specific examples? The prosecutor pressed. Price pulled out a small notebook. March 15, 2021. Officers Donnelly and Kearns arrested Marcus Washington, claiming they found cocaine in his car. I witnessed Officer Donnelly plant that evidence moments before the search. The complaint was buried by Internal Affairs Lieutenant James Morrison. The gallery erupted in gasps. Lieutenant Morrison, sitting in the back row, stood abruptly and left the courtroom. July 8, 2021. Price continued, his voice growing stronger. Sarah Chen, peaceful protester. Officers beat her while in custody, then charged her with assaulting them. Deputy Chief Williams personally ordered the body cam footage deleted. More gasps. More names? More incidents? With each revelation, Rick's face grew redder, his hands gripping the defense table until his knuckles turned white. The cover-ups went straight to the top, Price testified. Monthly meetings between Chief Judge Morton, DA Denton, and union representatives. They'd decide which cases to bury, which officers to protect. I have dates, locations, documentation of every meeting. Rick suddenly exploded from his chair. "You lying piece of garbage!" he shouted, lunging forward. "You're dead, Price! You hear me? Dead!" The courtroom erupted in chaos. Bailiffs rushed to restrain Rick as Brent tried to pull him back. Spectators jumped to their feet, some screaming, others trying to record the scene on their phones. Claudia's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Officer Donnelly, you will sit down or be removed from this courtroom and held in contempt." Rick struggled against the bailiffs, spittle flying as he shouted, "You can't protect him! You can't protect any of them!" "Remove Officer Donnelly," Claudia ordered, her voice ice-cold, "and add witness intimidation to his charges." As the bailiffs dragged Rick out, Price remained composed on the stand, though his hands gripped the rail tightly. Brent stared at him with calculated hatred, whispering something to his attorney. "Detective Price," Claudia addressed him directly, "do you wish to take a recess?" "No, Your Honor," Price replied firmly. "I need to finish this." The testimony continued for another hour, each revelation more damning than the last. Price presented documented evidence, copies of original reports, audio recordings, dated notes of conversations. The prosecution entered each piece into evidence as the defense attorney's objections grew increasingly desperate. When Claudia finally called for recess, the gallery buzzed with shocked conversations. Reporters rushed from the courtroom, phones already pressed to their ears. Price was escorted out under heavy security, his face drawn but determined. Claudia gathered her papers, watching as Brent was led away by his attorney, his cold eyes promising retribution. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the weight of what had been revealed. Later, as the sun began to set, Claudia walked to her car in the courthouse parking lot. The day's revelations echoed in her mind, each name and incident adding to the massive web of corruption they were uncovering. She was so lost in thought that she didn't immediately notice the change in her surroundings. Then she saw it. Her car, once pristine black, was now defaced with bright red spray paint. "Traitor!" screamed across the driver's side in jagged letters. The tires were slashed, glass fragments glittered around the broken windows, and what looked like acid had eaten through the paint in several places. Claudia stood perfectly still, studying the damage with clinical detachment. Other courthouse employees passing by gasped and offered sympathetic murmurs, but she barely heard them. The message was clear. They were escalating, moving from humiliation to destruction. First her hair, now her car. An ordinary person might have felt fear, but Claudia felt something else entirely. Certainty. She touched her bare scalp, feeling the rough patches that had yet to heal, and examined her vandalized car in silence. The red paint dripped like blood in the fading sunlight, each letter a testament to the desperation of those who had thought themselves untouchable. Marcus was working late in his office, reviewing Detective Price's testimony transcripts, when his phone buzzed. Lydia Cruz's name flashed on the screen. He answered, immediately concerned by her rapid breathing. "Marcus?" Lydia's voice trembled. "I need to see you right now. Please. It's about what happened to Judge Hayes." "Lydia, slow down. What's wrong?" "Not over the phone. Meet me in the parking garage, level B2. Please hurry. Marcus found Lydia pacing between the concrete pillars of the nearly empty garage. Her usually neat court clerk's uniform was wrinkled, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. When she saw him, she practically ran over. "I can't keep it anymore," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "They know I have it. They're watching me." "Have what?" Marcus asked, though he had a sinking feeling he knew. Lydia reached into her purse and pulled out a small black USB drive. "I was there that morning, in the security office. When those officers—" Her voice caught. "I recorded everything they did to Judge Hayes. The whole thing, on my phone." Marcus's eyes widened. "You have footage of the assault?" She nodded frantically. "I transferred it to this drive. But this morning, Chief Judge Whitaker called me into his office. He was different, cold. He asked if I had witnessed anything unusual that morning. Said it would be best if I forgot anything I might have seen." Marcus took the drive, his hand steady despite his racing heart. "Did you tell him about the recording?" "No, but he knows. Someone must have seen me. The security officer who was supposed to be monitoring the cameras that morning, he's been reassigned. And my supervisor—" Lydia's voice cracked. "She told me to be careful about what I say, that some things are better left alone." Marcus slipped the drive into his inner jacket pocket. "We'll protect you, Lydia. Judge Hayes won't let them." "You don't understand." Lydia grabbed his arm. "Chief Judge Whitaker, he's not just covering for those officers. He's protecting something bigger. The way he looked at me..." She shuddered. "Promise me you'll keep that safe. And please, don't let them know I gave it to you." "I promise," Marcus said solemnly. "Go home, Lydia. Try to act normal. We'll handle this." He watched her hurry away, her footsteps echoing in the concrete structure. As soon as she was gone, he called Claudia. Less than 3 hours later, his phone rang again. This time, it was Claudia. "They fired her," she said without preamble, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Lydia just called me in tears." They escorted her out of the building, claimed she violated court protocols and mishandled sensitive materials. Marcus cursed. The footage? The official evidence copy is gone. Supposedly, there was a technical error during transfer. The chain of custody documentation has vanished too. Claudia paused. "Marcus, where are you?" "Almost at your chambers. I haven't let that drive out of my sight." "Good. Hurry!" When Marcus arrived, Claudia was standing at her window, staring out at the city lights. Her reflection in the glass showed her bare scalp, a constant reminder of what they were fighting against. "I saw Whitaker leaving earlier," she said without turning. "He was smiling, actually smiling, after destroying that poor girl's career." Marcus placed the USB drive on her desk. "He's getting sloppy, desperate." "No." Claudia finally turned. "He's confident. This is how he's always operated, through proxies, through pressure, through quiet threats and sudden job losses. The perfect bureaucrat, leaving no fingerprints while he corrupts the very system he's sworn to protect." She picked up the drive, turning it over in her hands. "You know what this means, don't you? Whitaker didn't just know about the assault. He approved it, probably orchestrated it." "But why?" Marcus asked. "Why target you so brazenly?" "Because I was getting too close." Claudia moved to her desk, pulling out a key. "Those cases I've been reviewing, the ones that seem to vanish into thin air. Brutality complaints, misconduct charges, civil rights violations, all dismissed or buried under his watch. He's been protecting dirty cops for years, probably getting kickbacks from the union." She unlocked her bottom drawer and removed a false bottom, revealing a small safe. "And now we have proof, not just of what they did to me, but of how far they'll go to cover it up." The safe clicked open, Claudia placed the drive inside, then carefully replaced everything. Lydia risked everything to get us this footage. We won't let her sacrifice be for nothing. She locked the drawer, her movements deliberate and precise. In the quiet of her chambers, her whispered words carried the weight of iron. Not this time. Marcus watched her, struck by the determination in her bearing. Despite everything they'd thrown at her, the humiliation, the threats, the destruction of evidence, she remained unbowed. If anything, each attack only strengthened her resolve. The city lights cast long shadows through the window, and somewhere in the building, Chief Judge Whitaker probably sat in his office, believing he'd won another round. But he didn't understand what he was really fighting. This wasn't just about one judge or one act of cruelty. This was about justice itself, and Claudia Hayes had made it her life's work to protect that. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Chief Judge Whitaker's office as Claudia entered. He stood behind his mahogany desk, every inch the polished bureaucrat in his pressed robes. His smile was practiced, professional, and completely false. "Judge Hayes," he gestured to a leather chair, "please, have a seat." Claudia remained standing. "I prefer to keep this brief, Chief." "As you wish." He adjusted his tie, a nervous tell she'd noticed over the years. "I'll be direct then. There are concerns about your continued involvement in the Donnelly Kearns case." "Concerns?" Claudia's voice was ice-smooth. "From whom?" "Various parties." Whitaker circled his desk slowly. "The defense has raised valid points about potential bias. The police union is threatening formal complaints. Even some of our colleagues feel the situation has become problematic." "You mean my assault has become problematic?" Whitaker flinched at the word assault. "That unfortunate incident is precisely why you should consider recusing yourself. The appearance of a conflict of interest." "There is no conflict," Claudia cut in. "I'm more than capable of maintaining judicial impartiality." "No one doubts your capabilities, Claudia." His use of her first name made her skin crawl. "But we must consider the dignity of the court. The media attention alone. The dignity of the court?" Claudia's laugh was sharp. "Where was your concern for dignity when 2 officers dragged me into a back room and shaved my head?" Whitaker's facade cracked slightly. "That matter is being investigated internally." "By whom?" "The same people who buried Deputy Wallace's harassment complaints?" His eyes narrowed. "Those complaints were handled according to protocol." "Protocol?" Claudia stepped closer to his desk. "I've seen the files, Chief. Every complaint against Wallace was marked reviewed and dismissed, with your signature on each one." Color drained from Whitaker's face. "You're not authorized to access those records." "I'm a federal judge investigating civil rights violations. I have every authority." She placed both hands on his desk, leaning forward. "Just like I have the authority to question why our district attorney seems more interested in protecting corrupt officers than prosecuting them. Harold Denton is an elected official with a difficult job. Harold Denton is a coward who takes orders from you." Claudia's voice was quiet but sharp. "The question is, who's giving you orders?" Whitaker's mask fell completely. "You're treading dangerous ground, Judge Hayes." "Am I? Or am I finally on solid ground for the first time in years?" She straightened up. "You wanted me to recuse myself? Request denied. This isn't a formal motion, but it will be, won't it? After you call Denton and tell him to file it officially. After you meet with the union reps and promise them more buried complaints in exchange for their support." Claudia moved toward the door. "Save yourself the trouble. I'm seeing this through." "You have no idea what you're risking," Whitaker called after her. "Your career, your reputation. My integrity isn't negotiable." She paused at the doorway. "Unlike yours." Claudia's heels clicked sharply against the marble floors as she walked back to her chambers. Her composed expression betrayed none of the turmoil churning inside her. Every interaction with Whitaker revealed new layers of corruption, each more disturbing than the last. Marcus was waiting in her office, sorting through case files. He looked up as she entered. "How bad?" "Worse than we thought." Claudia sank into her chair. "Whitaker's not just covering for individual officers. He's maintaining a system. The harassment complaints, the brutality cases, the civil rights violations, they all go through him first." "But why?" Marcus spread out several documents. "What's his angle?" "Power. Control." Claudia picked up one of the files. "Every buried complaint is leverage. Every dismissed case is a favor owed. He's built a network of corruption, with himself at the center." She opened the file. Another complaint against Wallace, marked dismissed in Whitaker's flowing signature. And Denton's part of it. The DA's office doesn't pursue cases without Whitaker's approval. They probably coordinate which officers to protect, which cases to bury. A judge and a district attorney working together to obstruct justice, Marcus said quietly. "It's like a cancer in the system." "No," Claudia closed the file. "The system itself is the cancer. Whitaker and Denton are just symptoms." She touched her bare scalp, feeling the rough patches where the officers had been especially brutal. "We thought we were fighting against a few corrupt cops, but it's bigger than that." She stood and walked to her window, looking down at the courthouse steps, where protesters still gathered daily. The judiciary, the very institution meant to check power and protect rights, has been compromised. And Whitaker? She turned back to Marcus, her expression grim. "He's not just participating in the corruption, he's perfected it." Marcus gathered the files, his movements careful and deliberate. "What do we do?" Claudia watched a group of young lawyers hurrying up the courthouse steps, their faces eager and idealistic. How many of them would learn to look the other way? How many would be forced to choose between their conscience and their career? "We do our job," she said finally. "We follow the law. We protect the innocent. And we expose the truth. No matter how ugly it is, no matter how high it goes." The morning news hit like a tidal wave. Claudia sat in her kitchen, coffee growing cold, as headline after headline scrolled across her TV screen. "Federal judge accused of assaulting deputies," blazed one chyron. Above it, a carefully edited security photo showed Claudia at the metal detector, her hand raised, though they'd cropped out Wallace's aggressive stance toward her. Her phone buzzed with messages from fellow judges, reporters, and even old law school friends. Most expressed concern, but some had already chosen sides. A text from a longtime colleague read, "Maybe it's time to step back and let things cool down." The radio droned from her counter, a talk show host's voice sharp with manufactured outrage. "We're talking about a sitting federal judge who physically confronted security officers, then fabricated wild accusations to cover her tracks. If she's this unstable, how can she be trusted to make impartial decisions from the bench?" Claudia switched it off, her hands steady despite the anger burning in her chest. The coordinated nature of the attacks was clear. Whitaker's influence at work. She'd expected retaliation, but the speed and scope still surprised her. Her cell phone rang. "Marcus." "Judge, turn on Channel 4. His voice was tight with urgency. She flipped channels. A crowd had gathered outside the courthouse, their signs visible in the morning light. "Resign now. No biased judges. Support our police." "They're bussing them in," Marcus explained. "Union organizers, off-duty officers, paid protesters. They've been arriving since dawn. And our supporters? Being kept across the street by riot police. They're claiming security concerns." Of course they were. Claudia watched a man with a bullhorn lead chants against her, his face red with performative rage. "Any word from Alan?" Silence on the line. "Marcus?" That's why I called." His voice cracked. "Alan was attacked last night. He's in intensive care at Memorial." The room seemed to tilt. "How bad?" "They found him in his driveway. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding. Someone worked him over professionally, knew exactly how to hurt him without killing him." Claudia was already grabbing her keys. "I'm heading there now." "Judge, you should know. There are reporters camped outside your house." She paused at her door, checking through the peephole. Sure enough, several news vans lined her usually quiet street. "Back door it is," she muttered. 20 minutes later, she slipped into Memorial Hospital through a service entrance, a baseball cap pulled low over her shaved head. The ICU nurse recognized her immediately, but, to her credit, simply nodded and led her to Alan's room. The sight stopped her cold. Alan lay still, his face a mass of purple bruises, tubes snaking from his arms and nose. The steady beep of monitors provided a grim soundtrack. "The doctors say he'll live," the nurse offered quietly. "But recovery will take months." Claudia pulled a chair close to his bed. Despite the bruising, she could see where they'd been methodical, breaking bones but avoiding fatal damage. This wasn't random violence. This was a message. Alan's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly. "Judge Hayes?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here." She took his least damaged hand. "Don't try to talk." He swallowed painfully. "They wanted the files." "What files?" "Evidence. From my personal safe. Years of records." His breath hitched. "I didn't give them up." Claudia's grip tightened slightly. "You should have." "No." Despite his injuries, Alan's gaze was fierce. "Those files prove everything. The pattern of cover-ups, the payoffs, the witnesses who were threatened. All of it leads back to Whitaker and Denton." "Alan? They nearly killed you." "But they didn't." He managed a broken smile. "The files are safe, hidden where they'll never find them. Tell me where. I'll get them myself." He shook his head slightly, wincing. "Not yet. Too risky. Need to wait for the right moment." His eyes were starting to glaze, the pain medication taking hold. "This has to stop," Claudia said softly. "The violence, the corruption, all of it. I won't let what they did to you be in vain." "I know." His voice was fading. "That's why I trust you." He drifted into medicated sleep, his battered face relaxing slightly. Claudia sat with him for another hour, watching his chest rise and fall, each breath a small victory against those who'd tried to silence him. When she finally left the hospital, the sun was setting. She took a circuitous route home, watching for tails, finally pulling into her garage as darkness fell. The reporters had mostly dispersed, leaving only a few diehards with cameras. She was reaching for her front door when she saw it, a white envelope taped at eye level. Inside was a single photo. Alan's unconscious body in his driveway, blood pooling beneath him. On the back, written in block letters, "Next time, we won't stop." Claudia's hands didn't shake as she carefully placed the photo in an evidence bag. Her attackers wanted fear. They wanted her to back down, to recuse herself, to let the corruption continue unchallenged. But standing there in the growing dark, holding proof of their escalating violence, Claudia felt something beyond fear, something harder, something that had been growing since they first put those clippers to her head. The courthouse loomed ahead like a fortress under siege. Protesters filled the steps, their signs bobbing like angry waves. Police barriers created a narrow channel through the chaos, but even from her car, Claudia could hear the competing chants. "Justice for cops," shouted one group. "Stand with Judge Hayes," countered another. Claudia straightened her suit jacket, touching the smooth skin where her hair used to be. The morning sun caught the chrome of news vans lining the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical trees. Marcus waited at the service entrance, his usual warm smile replaced by worried eyes. "Morning, Judge. It's intense out there." "Nothing we haven't handled before," Claudia replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. This was different. The air crackled with tension. They walked through the loading dock, their footsteps echoing. Security guards watched them pass, their faces carefully blank. No one knew whom to trust anymore. As they approached her chambers, a commotion erupted in the main corridor. Men in dark suits strode purposefully through the courthouse, their FBI badges glinting. "Federal investigators," Marcus whispered. "They arrived 20 minutes ago." The lead agent, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, spotted Claudia and changed course. "Judge Hayes, I'm Special Agent Diana Chen. We need to speak with you." Claudia gestured to her office. "Of course." Inside, Agent Chen wasted no time. "We've opened a formal investigation into systemic corruption within this courthouse. The attack on Detective Price triggered federal involvement." "About time," Marcus muttered. Chen's eyes narrowed. "We're particularly interested in Chief Judge Whitaker's involvement in suppressing evidence of police misconduct, and the DA's office's role in covering up civilian complaints." "I have documentation," Claudia said. "Files that prove the pattern. We'll need those." Chen paused. "Judge Hayes, you should know. There's intense pressure to shut this down. Powerful people want this buried. They always do." Claudia's voice was steel. "But I won't be intimidated." A knock interrupted them. Marcus opened the door to reveal a court officer. "Judge, they're ready for you." The main courtroom was packed. Rick and Brent sat with their attorneys, their arrogance dimmed but not extinguished. The gallery buzzed with tension. As Claudia approached the bench, Chief Judge Whitaker intercepted her. "A word, Claudia?" She noted his use of her first name, a subtle attempt to establish dominance. "In open court, Chief." His smile tightened. "This has gone far enough. Recuse yourself now, or face a formal review of your fitness to serve." "Are you threatening me, Chief Whitaker?" "I'm trying to save your career." His voice dropped. "Think about your legacy." "I am." Claudia stepped past him. "That's exactly why I'm seeing this through." The room fell silent as she took the bench. Through the windows, protest chants filtered in like distant thunder. Marcus appeared at her side, passing her a note. "Security footage recovered from 3 new sources. They can't bury it all." Claudia allowed herself a small smile. The truth was like water. It found every crack, every weakness. They could build dams of lies and intimidation, but eventually it would break through. She lifted her gavel, the weight familiar in her hand. The protesters' signs were visible through the courthouse windows, their messages of hate and support competing for attention. But here, in this room, only the facts mattered. "Court is in session," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner. Rick and Brent shifted uncomfortably. Their new attorney, clearly hired by the union, shuffled papers with forced confidence. From her elevated position, Claudia could see Agent Chen and her team settling into the gallery, their notepads ready. Chief Judge Whitaker stood at the back, his face darkening like a thundercloud. Let them watch, Claudia thought. Let them see what real justice looks like. Marcus touched her arm lightly. They can smear you, he whispered, but the truth is stronger. Claudia's fingers found the rough texture of her judicial robe, the garment that symbolized everything she'd fought for, everything she believed in. They'd tried to strip her dignity away with those clippers, but they'd only revealed her strength. The morning light streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor. Outside, the chants continued, but they seemed distant now, irrelevant. This room was her domain, and here the truth would have its day. She gripped her robe tighter, feeling the weight of responsibility, of justice delayed but not denied. The cost didn't matter anymore. Not her reputation, not her career, not even her safety. What mattered was this moment, this chance to show that no one, not corrupt cops, not compromised judges, not even the system itself, was above the law. The room waited, holding its collective breath. Claudia looked down at the defendants, the men who had humiliated her but ultimately revealed the depth of corruption she now fought. Their faces showed the first hints of real fear. Good, she thought. They should be afraid. Not of her, but of the truth they'd tried so hard to hide. The morning sun caught her shaved head, turning it into a beacon of defiance. She felt the eyes of every person in the room, knew that this moment would define not just her career, but the very notion of justice in this courthouse. Marcus stood ready beside her, files organized, evidence prepared. Agent Chen watched intently from the gallery. Even Chief Judge Whitaker, for all his threats, couldn't stop what was about to unfold. Claudia held her robe like armor, steel in her spine and fire in her heart. The time for hesitation was over. The time for truth had come. The courthouse was different at night. Shadows stretched across empty hallways, and every footstep echoed like a whisper of secrets. Claudia sat alone in her chambers, case files spread across her desk under the warm glow of her desk lamp. The day's protests had finally died down, leaving behind only scattered signs and the lingering tension in the air. Her fingers traced the smooth skin of her scalp, a habit she'd developed since the assault. Each touch was a reminder of their cruelty, but also of her resolve. The stack of death threats she'd received sat in a neat pile, each one catalogued and documented. They wouldn't silence her with fear. A soft knock startled her. Judge Hayes? The night guard, Tom, stood in her doorway. Sorry to disturb you, but this was just delivered to the security desk. He held up a plain manila envelope. At this hour? Claudia checked her watch. 11:23 p.m. Young woman dropped it off. Wouldn't give her name, wore a hoodie. Said it was urgent. Tom placed the envelope on her desk. Want me to stay while you open it? Claudia shook her head. I'll be fine, Tom. Thank you. After he left, she examined the envelope. No markings, no return address. Just her name in typed letters. She'd received enough threats to be cautious, but something about this felt different. Using a letter opener, she carefully slit the top. A small flash drive tumbled out, along with a handwritten note on lined paper. Judge Hayes, I'm sorry I ran. They threatened my family, but I couldn't let them bury the truth. The footage is all here, unedited, time-stamped. Use it wisely. Claudia's heart raced. Lydia, the brave clerk who'd risked everything to film the assault. The flash drive felt impossibly heavy in her palm. Her hands trembled slightly as she plugged it into her laptop. A single video file appeared, dated the day of the incident. Claudia hesitated, cursor hovering over the play button. Did she want to relive this? The video began. The security camera angle showed the courthouse entrance. There she was, walking through the metal detector. Wallace's sneer was clearly visible as he called over Rick and Brent. The audio was surprisingly clear. Papers look fake to me. Rick's voice dripped with manufactured suspicion. I am a federal judge, her recorded self stated calmly. Sure you are, sweetheart, Brent laughed. Claudia watched herself being handcuffed, maintaining dignity even as they roughly grabbed her arms. The footage followed them, dragging her to the holding room. Here, Lydia had switched to her phone camera, filming through a partially open door. The shaving scene played out in brutal clarity. Rick's face twisted with cruel enjoyment as he powered up the clippers. Brent's hands gripped her shoulders too tight, leaving bruises she'd discovered later. Their laughter echoed through the laptop speakers as her hair fell in clumps. This'll teach you to respect the badge, Rick snarled. Smile for the camera, Brent taunted, snapping photos with his phone. Wallace stood watching, not participating, but not intervening either. His silent complicity was damning. Claudia forced herself to watch every second. Her composure in the video amazed her. She hadn't broken, hadn't begged. Each sweep of the clippers had only strengthened her resolve. The timestamp proved authenticity. The angle captured every face clearly. There could be no denying what happened, no spinning this as a misunderstanding. She paused the video, studying the frozen image of Rick's laughing face. How many others had they humiliated? How many victims had stayed silent, knowing the system would protect the abusers? The night seemed to press closer around her as she contemplated the flash drive's implications. Using this would be like dropping a bomb on the courthouse hierarchy. The chief judge, the DA, the police union, they'd all tried to bury this incident. This would expose not just the assault, but the cover-up. Her career, everything she'd worked for, could be collateral damage. They'd call her biased, unstable, unfit for the bench. The right-wing media would paint her as an activist judge with an agenda. But wasn't this exactly why she'd become a judge? To ensure justice prevailed, even when, especially when, the powerful tried to prevent it? She opened her briefcase, touching the smooth leather interior. Years of case law and precedents had filled this bag. Now it would carry something more explosive than any legal argument. The building creaked and settled around her as she sat in thought. From her window, she could see the protest signs littering the courthouse steps, waiting for tomorrow's crowds. The media trucks would return at dawn. The circus would begin again. Claudia ejected the flash drive, holding it up to the light. Such a small thing to carry such weight. Lydia was out there somewhere, probably terrified, but she'd done the right thing. Now it was Claudia's turn. Her hand didn't shake as she slipped the drive into the briefcase's inner pocket. Tomorrow would change everything. But tonight, in the quiet of her chambers, she felt nothing but certainty. She gathered her files, straightened her desk. The light from her lamp cast her shadow on the wall, head held high, unbowed. They'd tried to shame her with the shaving, but they'd only given her armor instead. Every pair of eyes that stared at her bald head tomorrow would see the evidence of their cruelty and her strength. The clock struck midnight as Claudia closed her briefcase, the flash drive secure inside. Tomorrow's hearing loomed, but she was ready. The truth had found its way to her, as it always did. Now she would make sure everyone saw it. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Every seat in the gallery was filled, reporters packed shoulder to shoulder with community activists and concerned citizens. The air felt electric, charged with tension and possibility. Camera crews lined the back wall, their lenses trained on the bench. Outside, competing crowds of protesters pressed against barricades, their chants muffled through the thick courthouse walls. Signs bobbed above the masses, some demanding Claudia's removal, others praising her courage. Rick and Brent sat at the defense table, their usual swagger replaced by nervous glances. Their attorney shuffled papers frantically, already sensing the shift in momentum. The prosecution table was notably empty. DA Harold Denton had called in sick. A hush fell over the room as Claudia entered, her robe flowing behind her. The overhead lights gleamed off her bare scalp, drawing every eye in the room. She took her seat with deliberate calm, arranging her files with practiced precision. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. Claudia looked out at the packed gallery, her gaze steady. "Before we proceed with today's testimony, the court has new evidence to enter into record." She opened a thick folder. "I have here the complete disciplinary file of Deputy James Wallace, previously sealed by administrative order." The defense attorney jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Those records are protected personnel files." "Overruled," Claudia's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "These files were illegally sealed to conceal a pattern of misconduct. The public has a right to know." She began reading, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the room. September 15, 2015. Deputy Wallace detained and strip-searched an African-American female attorney, claiming her bar card was fake. Complaint buried by internal affairs. The gallery murmured. Claudia continued. March 3, 2017. Deputy Wallace used excessive force against a Hispanic court interpreter, breaking 3 ribs. Witness statements disappeared from the file. Page after page, year after year, the pattern emerged. Racial profiling, excessive force, abuse of power, all swept under the rug by a system designed to protect its own. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Cameras clicked continuously. April 22, 2023. Claudia paused, her voice growing harder. Deputy Wallace assisted Officers Donnelly and Kearns in the illegal detention and assault of a federal judge. She looked directly at Rick and Brent. That judge was me. Before the defense could object again, Claudia pressed a button on her desk. The large screens mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The court will now view security footage from that day. The video began playing. The quality was crystal clear, leaving no room for denial or misinterpretation. The gallery watched in horror as the scene unfolded. The false arrest, the forced march to the holding room, the cruel spectacle of the shaving. Gasps echoed through the courtroom at the sound of Rick and Brent's laughter, their taunts now preserved for all to hear. Several jurors covered their mouths in shock. A few spectators wept openly. Rick suddenly lurched to his feet, his face red with rage. "This is garbage! We were doing our job!" "Sit down, Officer Donnelly," Claudia ordered, her voice cutting through his outburst. "You can't show this!" Brent joined in, panic breaking through his usual composure. "We had cause. She was suspicious." "Officers, control yourselves, or you will be removed," Claudia warned, her finger hovering over the bailiff's call button. "Your job," she continued, her voice ringing with controlled fury, "was to protect and serve justice. Instead, you chose to abuse your authority. You chose to humiliate and degrade a citizen you were sworn to protect. You chose cruelty, and you did so believing your badges would shield you from consequences." The defense attorney tried one last desperate move. "Your Honor, you must recuse yourself. This video proves you're personally involved." "Counselor," Claudia interrupted, "this video proves your clients assaulted a federal judge in her own courthouse. If anything, it proves the extraordinary lengths they will go to abuse their power." A commotion at the back of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. A team of suited individuals entered, led by a tall woman with federal credentials displayed. They moved purposefully toward the bench. "Your Honor," the woman announced, her voice carrying authority, "I'm Special Agent Catherine Martinez with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. We're here to take custody of all courthouse records related to this case and any other instances of misconduct." The defense table erupted in whispered panic. Rick's face had gone from red to pale. Brent stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. "The Department of Justice has determined this case represents a potential pattern of systemic civil rights violations," Agent Martinez continued. "We'll be conducting a full investigation of the courthouse, police department, and district attorney's office." Claudia nodded solemnly. "The court will cooperate fully with the federal investigation." She turned to address the gallery. "This case is no longer about one incident or one judge. It's about a system that failed its people, about power that corrupted those meant to serve justice." The federal agents began collecting files, their movements efficient and purposeful. Reporters rushed from the courtroom, phones pressed to their ears. The story was exploding beyond local control, beyond the reach of those who had tried to bury it. Rick and Brent sat deflated. Their earlier bravado evaporated. Their attorney scribbled notes frantically, but the damage was done. The truth they had tried to suppress now played on screens across the nation, their cruelty exposed for all to see. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations, the air thick with the sense of history unfolding. Claudia watched it all from the bench, her posture straight, her newly bare head held high. They had tried to shame her, to break her spirit. Instead, they had given her the weapon that would bring their whole corrupt system crashing down. The courtroom was even more crowded for sentencing day. Every available space was filled, with people standing along the walls. The morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Rick and Brent sat at the defense table, their orange jumpsuits a stark contrast to their former police uniforms. Their shoulders slumped under the weight of their guilty verdicts. Deputy Wallace sat separately with his own attorney, his face ashen after accepting a plea deal. Chief Judge Whitaker's seat in the gallery was conspicuously empty. He was being processed at the federal courthouse across town, facing his own indictment for years of covering up police misconduct. The morning news had shown footage of FBI agents escorting him from his home in handcuffs. DA Harold Denton's resignation letter was still making headlines. He'd quit late last night, his carefully worded statement doing little to hide the scandal that forced him out. His empty office was already being cleaned out. Boxes of files seized by federal investigators. Claudia entered the courtroom, her robe settling around her shoulders as she took her place at the bench. Her hair had started to grow back in patches, but she kept it shaved, a reminder of why they were all here. "Please rise," the bailiff called. "Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Claudia Hayes presiding." The shuffle of people standing filled the room. Claudia surveyed the crowd, noting the presence of several police reform activists and civil rights leaders who had supported her through the trial. "Be seated," she said, her voice clear and steady. "We are here for sentencing in 3 related cases." She lifted the first file. Deputy James Wallace. Wallace stood shakily, his attorney's hand on his elbow. "Deputy Wallace, you have pleaded guilty to conspiracy against rights, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice. Your plea agreement acknowledges 27 separate incidents of civil rights violations over 12 years. Claudia's gaze was unwavering. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Wallace's voice cracked. "Your Honor, I'm sorry. I convinced myself I was following protocol, but I was wrong." "Indeed you were," Claudia replied. "Based on your cooperation with federal investigators and your guilty plea, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You are permanently barred from any law enforcement or security position." Wallace nodded numbly and sat down. His attorney squeezed his shoulder. "Officers Richard Donnelly and Brent Kearns, please rise." They stood, chains clinking. The jury had found them guilty on all counts: civil rights violations, assault on a federal judge, abuse of authority, and filing false reports. "Officer Donnelly," Claudia began, "throughout this trial, you have shown no remorse. You maintained that your actions were justified, even when faced with clear evidence of your cruelty." Rick's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. "Officer Kearns, you tried to present yourself as the more reasonable partner. Yet evidence showed you were often the instigator, encouraging escalation while hiding behind Officer Donnelly's more obvious aggression." Brent stared at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. "Your actions represent the worst abuse of police power. You targeted citizens based on race, fabricated charges to justify arrests, and used violence to intimidate those who dared question you." Claudia lifted another document. The pre-sentencing report details 32 previous complaints against you both, all buried by a corrupt system. The gallery murmured. Several of those complainants were present, finally seeing justice served. Richard Donnelly, this court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release. She turned to Brent. Brent Kearns, this court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of supervised release. Both of you are permanently barred from any law enforcement position and must complete extensive civil rights training before release. Their attorney immediately stood to object, but Claudia continued, her voice rising over his. The sentences reflect not only your assault on me, but your long pattern of abuse against this community. You betrayed your badges, your oaths, and the citizens you swore to protect. She looked out at the packed courtroom, at the faces of those who had suffered under the corrupt system these men represented. The young public defender Wallace had humiliated, the court interpreter who still carried scars from his attack, the countless others who had been intimidated into silence. Let today's sentences send a clear message, Claudia declared, her voice filling the chamber. The law is not a shield for the powerful. It is a sword for the people. No badge, no robe, no office grants immunity from justice. The gallery erupted in applause. The bailiff made no move to quiet them. This court has one final order, Claudia continued when the room settled. All case files previously sealed by Chief Judge Whitaker will be reviewed by an independent commission. Every complaint buried, every voice silenced, will finally be heard. Rick and Brent were led away in chains, their former swagger replaced by defeated shuffling. Wallace followed with his head bowed. Years of unchecked power ended with the click of handcuffs. Reporters rushed from the courtroom, racing to break the story. Civil rights lawyers hugged their clients, some crying with relief. The wheel of justice, so long stuck in the mud of corruption, had finally begun to turn. Claudia remained seated at her bench, watching the scene unfold. She thought of that morning in the holding room, of the clippers against her skull, of their laughter as her hair fell. They had tried to break her spirit. Instead, they had sparked a revolution that would reshape the entire justice system. The federal investigation was expanding daily, reaching into other precincts, other courthouses. Whitaker's indictment had cracked open decades of sealed files. Denton's resignation was just the beginning of a broader cleanup in the DA's office. Weeks had passed since the sentencing. The courthouse halls looked different now, not just physically, with new security protocols and civilian oversight stations, but in spirit. Where fear and intimidation once ruled, there was now an atmosphere of accountability and respect. Claudia walked these transformed corridors, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Staff members nodded respectfully as she passed. A young public defender smiled and whispered, "Thank you," as they crossed paths. Even the new security officers, carefully vetted and trained under reformed standards, carried themselves differently, with professionalism rather than swagger. The reforms were everywhere. Through the glass walls of the training room, she could see officers attending mandatory bias awareness sessions. Down another hall, civilian oversight board members reviewed complaint files in their newly established office. Public audit reports were posted prominently in the lobby, detailing response times, use of force incidents, and complaint resolutions. Marcus hurried up to her, tablet in hand. "Judge Hayes, have you seen the news?" She hadn't needed to. The whispers had been circulating all morning. The president's office had released a statement announcing her nomination as chief judge of the district. The official announcement praised her unwavering courage in the face of corruption and commitment to transforming the justice system. "It's all over every network," Marcus continued, showing her the headlines. The Senate Judiciary Committee is fast-tracking your confirmation hearings. Claudia touched the smooth skin of her head, a gesture that had become almost unconscious. What matters isn't the position, Marcus. It's what we do with it. They reached her chambers, where several community leaders waited. Reverend James Thompson, who had organized peaceful protests throughout the trial, stepped forward to shake her hand. Judge Hayes, you've done what decades of activism couldn't. You turned personal humiliation into systemic change. Dr. Maria Rodriguez, head of the local Civil Rights Coalition, nodded in agreement. The oversight boards are already making a difference. Complaint processing times are down 70%. Officers think twice now before using excessive force. And it's not just here, added Professor Chen from the law school. Other districts are adopting our reforms. They're calling it the Hayes model. Mandatory bias training, civilian review boards, transparent complaint systems. Claudia listened to their reports, noting how hope had replaced the resignation in their voices. These were people who had fought for change for years, only to be stonewalled by the old guard. Now they were partners in reform, their expertise valued and implemented. The real work is just beginning, Claudia reminded them. We need to ensure these changes become permanent, that they survive beyond any one person or administration. After the meeting, Claudia took a moment alone in her chambers. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, warming the room. She stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. Her hand moved again to her head, but this time with purpose rather than habit. The bald scalp that had once marked her humiliation had become something else entirely. Each morning, she carefully shaved it smooth, not to hide the uneven regrowth, but to maintain what had become a symbol. Women in the community had started shaving their heads in solidarity. Young lawyers wore their hair close-cropped in protest of the old system. What was meant to shame her had become a crown of defiance. On her desk sat a stack of reforms still to be implemented. New training protocols, accountability measures, community outreach programs. The work ahead was enormous, but for the first time in decades, real change felt possible. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Lydia Cruz, the clerk whose footage had helped break the case open. She had been reinstated with back pay and a promotion to oversight coordinator. Judge Hayes, the afternoon session is ready to begin. Claudia nodded, donning her robe. The weight of it felt different now, not as a symbol of authority alone, but of responsibility to ensure justice was truly served. The walk to the courtroom was lined with new faces, young clerks who had been hired for their commitment to reform, veteran staff who had found the courage to speak up against abuses, community representatives who now had a real voice in the system. At the courtroom doors, Marcus handed her the afternoon's docket. "Ready, Your Honor?" "Always," she replied, squaring her shoulders. The gallery was full as she entered, but the atmosphere was transformed from those tense days of the trial. These were not faces drawn with fear or anger, but bright with purpose and hope. Public defenders sat confidently beside their clients. Police officers stood respectfully, their new training evident in their demeanor. Civilian observers took notes from their designated seats, their oversight role now officially recognized. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise. Court is now in session." The Honorable Judge Claudia Hayes presiding. Claudia took her place at the bench, surveying the room. She saw familiar faces among the community leaders, law students, and reform advocates who had supported her through the darkest days. But she also saw new faces, people who had found the courage to seek justice, knowing the system would now hear them. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, catching the polished surface of the gavel. Claudia lifted it, feeling its weight. No longer just a symbol of order maintained through force, but of justice served through truth and accountability. As she brought it down, the sound echoed through the chamber. The day's session would begin. Cases would be heard. Justice would be served. And this time, it would be real justice. Not the hollow performance of the old system, but the true protection of rights and dignity that every person deserved. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.